Hi folks, welcome to my channel or welcome back. My name is Kat. I'm a licensed registered dietitian nutritionist, and on this channel we like to talk about weight inclusive, weight neutral focused approaches to health, as well as diving into scammy and, in my opinion, unethical nutrition related businesses, products, mostly nutrition related MLMs, and other fear mongering nutrition related claims. Now in this video we are doing a good old fashioned kind of reaction video. This is to a Young Living distributor talking about her Candida experience and sharing some of the resources, specifically Young Living supplements, to help combat Candida. Before we dive in, please be sure to make sure you're subscribed and give this video a like. I would greatly appreciate that. If you have any nutrition related MLM stories or things that you want to share with me for me to react to or respond to, go ahead and send that over to me and let me know if you would like for me to credit you in any specific way for that. You can send it over email or DM, anything's fine. And with most of my videos, I will be blurring this distributor. I want to focus on some of the claims, the messaging, rather than the person. All right, so if all that sounds good to you, let's go. I'm going to be playing this video and reacting to it, kind of pausing here and there to give my take or to give information regarding the topics that she is talking about. We are going to be talking about Candida, leaky gut, and adrenal fatigue. Let's go.
When I dealt with my Candida, my large Candida issue about 14 years ago, the reason that I knew to recognize what it was because my mom had been through it when I was a kid. And so otherwise, I don't really know how long it would have taken me to have gotten to that as a solution or as something for me to look into. I don't know that anybody around me would have known to look for that.
Okay, so I know we just started, but I want to pause there and kind of talk about Candida and what that is. So Candida is a type of yeast that is commonly found in and on the human body. It typically isn't a cause for concern. It typically isn't causing any issues unless there is an overgrowth going on. Now, overgrowths can occur in a variety of places in the body. Sometimes it might occur in the mouth, what is known as thrush. It can also be responsible for vaginal yeast infections. It can also be present or get into organs, but that is very rare. Candida populations, the fungus itself is usually held in check because we have a variety of other microbiome, other things kind of keeping it in check. When we're talking about overgrowth, sometimes we can see that if there is an excessive or even just sometimes with antibiotic use. In that case, the antibiotic is focused on the bacteria, right, that's killing that off, and so the fungus, the Candida, can have an overgrowth. Then it can also happen when there's a surge of various hormones like estrogen, for example. Sometimes during pregnancy, when estrogen levels are in a different place, that can also trigger an overgrowth. People with diabetes are at a higher risk factor for that overgrowth, and overall people with a compromised immune system. And so typically, if you are someone who experiences yeast infections on a regular basis, that is something to definitely talk to your doctor about to see if the culture wise, if it's related to that. Management wise, you will get an antifungal. They'll probably do a swab to figure out the culture of what is going on so they can prescribe something that's going to be beneficial. But when you're talking about symptoms related to an overgrowth of Candida, according to the Cleveland Clinic, we're thinking about skin redness or a rash, itching, blisters, lumpy white patches, pain, soreness, discomfort. There's a burning sensation, maybe some vaginal discharge. And so those are going to be the main symptoms when we're thinking about Candida. But as you'll see in this video and outside of this video on various less evidence-based places, going to kind of lump everything into a Candida overgrowth. Literally every issue that you can have, if you can think of an issue, sometimes people will say that is because of Candida. We're seeing it as this kind of catch-all diagnosis from a lot of multi-level marketing supplement distributors, and it's really interesting. Now, there's a mix of misinformation and just information regarding Candida and nutrition specifically. Now, if you do a quick Google search or look on different blogs and whatever, typically you'll find recommendations to remove or avoid any added sugars or carbohydrates to some extent. There's also the recommendation to remove sometimes yeast containing foods like bread, for example, even though the yeast in bread is completely different. while also increasing probiotic rich foods. So foods that are fermented that have those naturally occurring probiotics through the fermentation process. Now, the relationship between diet and Candida overgrowth, it's not like this one size fits all kind of thing. We're still doing research in that area, and there's not enough evidence to just recommend somebody to completely cut out all carbohydrates, for example. And when you're talking about Candida and some of the recommendations, you might see where it says to avoid any sugars. Well, the problem that comes with that is that those sugars can break down into glucose. Glucose is found in something like broccoli, for example. And so where is that line? The glucose in broccoli is going to be, not the glucose itself is not different, but there's going to be fiber, there's going to be a lot more like phytonutrients, plant chemicals, vitamins, minerals overall in that broccoli. It's still glucose. And that's where we need to really take a step back when you are seeing these kind of recommendations, these kind of like black or white recommendations. It's not like an all or nothing kind of thing. And that's where we can get in trouble and really get into this kind of dichotomous thinking and unhelpful overall pattern thinking wise when it relates to like nutrition in general. And sometimes people will reduce their intake when they are dealing with a Candida overgrowth, and they might feel better, but it might be for just the reason that they're maybe offsetting that amount of refined carbohydrates with more nutrient dense foods overall. Or maybe they have some other kind of microbiome dysbiosis or imbalance that causes some of the compounds in those foods to have issues with the breakdown. There's kinds of carbohydrates that are known to be more fermentable. If you're familiar with the low FODMAP diet, it relates to that. But basically, there are foods that aren't necessarily bad, like an apple is a high FODMAP food, but it's just the kind of carbohydrates that are in there that for some people with the microbiome dysbiosis, that can cause some excessive gas or bloating or changes with their bowel movements. And so if somebody is taking out sugar, carbohydrates from their diet, they might feel a little bit of a reduction in those symptoms, but it might not be related to them taking that out for the Candida purposes. It might be just because they have a different kind of dysbiosis going on, and maybe they are having some issues with the breakdown of certain kind of carbohydrates. Same thing with like the breads. The bread, oftentimes when someone takes out the bread, they might feel better. It might be because they are having something else that is maybe more nutrient dense, or it could be also that it's not the gluten that is causing any issues, but there are other compounds in there like fructans that some people have an issue breaking down, and with the consumption of that can cause some of that excessive gas and bloating and changes with bowel movements. And so if they reduce that, they might feel better. So someone might feel better when taking some of those recommendations when they are experiencing a Candida overgrowth, but it's not necessarily because of that response on the Candida. It could be for a variety of other reasons. Now, when you're thinking about like a lot of probiotic containing foods or probiotics in general, those aren't usually enough to treat any kind of like yeast infection, but there is some research to suggest that it can help reduce some of that overgrowth, but it's not used as like the primary care. Okay, so with all that being said, let's go back to the video.
When I dealt with my Candida, my large Candida issue about 14 years ago, the reason that I knew to recognize what it was because my mom had been through it when I was a kid. And so otherwise, I don't really know how long it would have taken me to have gotten to that as a solution or as something for me to look into. I don't know that anybody around me would have known to look for that.
I just want to say that if you are experiencing something like that, it might be helpful to meet with a registered dietitian who specializes in digestive health, because that is going to be on the list, kind of red flags of things to kind of rule out. And so with her saying that she doesn't know if anybody would have caught it, again, I've said it so many times on my channel, but dietitians, registered dietitians are such an important piece and part of the healthcare team. And this is like another example as to why that might be helpful. Now, of course, access to a dietitian is an issue in and of itself, but just wanted to make that point.
It is something that's really good to know because odds are someone in your life will need it at some point. the knowledge of this as an issue is only in the range of some 50 years old. It was around the 70s that there even became much discussion about Candida as a problem, because we were new to even understanding how the gut worked, understanding how the good bacteria and the bad bacteria and all of the things worked, and how we needed to support any of that is really fairly new knowledge. And it's really wild to think about that, really wild to think about how prior to that, as much airtime as that gets today, and as much as we're thinking about probiotics and all these things, that there was just no discussion anywhere of that.
I guess it's not really that surprising to me. She seems very surprised that there was not discussion about the digestive system, the microbiome 50 to 70 years ago, but that tracks along with like how like science, what we've grown with, how we've grown, what we've learned specifically or especially in nutrition science in the last 50 or 70 years. It's been quite a bit of information. It's just like exponentially with knowledge in that field. And so it's not that surprising. Same thing with a lot of vitamins and minerals and just nutrients in general. So
I realized, oh yeah, I'm getting nauseous every time that I eat. And one of my biggest symptoms was I just had so much brain fog. But it's so interesting because everyone's like, yeah, you just had a baby. Yeah, you have little kids. It'll just be that way. You're just tired. But I knew it was more than it should have been. I knew it was not okay. And that it wasn't something that I needed to ignore and live with.
So you can have some kind of food sensitivities. Now the field of food sensitivities is really new, and there is a lot of like false positives out there because of how basically what is called the immunoglobulin G response or IgG response. Sometimes you'll have food sensitivity tests show that you have an increased response by an increased IgG level, and that might just be your body just reacting to putting a foreign object in your body, right? Like that's what food is. And so sometimes it's not actually like a concern, but sometimes it can be. And so that's why most food sensitivity tests are not worth doing. There's a lot of more research going on and a lot of like really exciting things happening within the food sensitivity area, but there's a lot of like scams in the area too. So yeah, you can have some brain fog as a kind of symptom for when you are consuming like specific foods, and that can change depending on like the person. Like they might have that more of that reaction or response and might not have that same reaction or response like down the road. It's not like a consistent thing like a true food allergy is.
Then I started realizing that it had been such a gradual process, but I realized, man, I'm really sad, but it doesn't seem connected to anything. Like it wasn't about anything. I would just get unreasonably sad, like at night when I put my kids to bed, and be so happy I'm here putting my kids to bed, but I'm crying because I'm very emotional about it and all these things. I was like, what is going on? Something is just not me here, and it doesn't make sense based on what's happening in my life, and it doesn't connect to anything. And so I continued to research and continued to learn more about it. And
I also wonder, like, how were her vitamin D levels at that time? Was she at an like an amount that is a deficient amount? That's not going to cure any kind of like mental issues, but if you are deficient, that can make those mental issues like that much worse. So just a lot of questions and things that can be related to not like Candida, and even if it is related to microbiome, it can be related to a dysbiosis in general, not specifically that Candida that so many people like to focus on these days.
Between what I was experiencing and what I saw in symptoms around Candida. So I started to fight it kind of on my own with what I had read. I saw things about you got to starve the Candida. One of the things that there have been studies done around Candida that I find really interesting and felt like was very true in my case is that there have been studies that in a deficiency of vitamin B, Candida can grow. And I saw some research that was talking about that the Candida started to feed on certain things more aggressively when the vitamin B wasn't there. It was all really fascinating and something that you could go read about. But I for sure know that I was very deficient in vitamin B at that point.
So vitamin B is important for a variety of reasons. And that's one of the reasons why when somebody is on like a vegetarian diet or vegan diet, there is that recommendation for B supplementation. Because if you think about what are the foods that are highest in B vitamins, you're going to think about like beef, for example. So if that was something, and she'll talk about that's not something that she was really consuming, and so she potentially had that deficiency in B. And so that was like another link in her mind to it being related to Candida.
Another thing that really depletes B is stress. Well, you guys, we are in high stress mode. I saw something recently that said that millennials are the first generation that don't experience stress, they are stress. And I was like, whoa.
Millennials don't experience stress, they are stress. I don't know how I feel about that. This is totally off topic, but when I was in college, I had so many people saying that like you're gonna miss it and you have all of this free time during college and it's just like enjoy it basically. They were wrong. Maybe it was just because of my experience. I was involved in a lot of like extracurricular activities just to help with my resume. I had zero control over a lot, especially because like my future relied on grades because like I needed grades and I needed specific experiences on my resume to become a dietitian. And it was just the most stressful time ever. If you're in college, I want to offer the idea that if you are highly stressed, it can get better. It just depends on the person and their experience. But in my experience, college was the most stressful ever. Okay, back to this.
There is research going on around that, and it is very eye-opening and heartbreaking. But then you think about living that way more than ever before, and then you think about the odds of that Candida being higher based on the fact that stress is so ever present, and then that our vitamin B levels are probably greatly reduced, which we see in so many people.
A lot of people don't have vitamin B deficiency. You're at a higher risk if you are vegetarians and vegans, but like in general, B vitamin deficiency is not one of like the like nutrients of concern.
That's one reason that I take Master Formula, which is a multivitamin and has B, and I also take Super B, which is an incredible B supplement. And I can tell a massive difference in the way that I feel, and really wish that I had both of those at that time.
They're non-Young Living, non-MLM B vitamins.
So that is a huge factor to consider. But then another thing in looking at what Candida is and how it works in our body is the way that just our kind of standard diet is in America, in the world to some degree, but especially in America. And that is a diet that is high in carbohydrates, high in flour and white flours and potatoes and starchy things, and then high in sugar. Candida eats sugar. So you eat the sugar, Candida eats the sugar, and then the Candida grows like rabbits. Like it is just growing and having all the babies at a rapid pace, and it just explodes. And there's nothing to stop it because that same diet has our gut in a place where so little good is living, where so little good bacteria is because, again, of the way that we eat.
I don't like this idea, like the way we eat. It just depends on the person, right? And their circumstances. A lot of factors play into what an American is eating. I get so frustrated sometimes about this, like there's this one size kind of American diet. When I talk, like I see multiple people every day virtually, everybody's eating different things. And so it just frustrated me when I talk to so many people on a daily basis about their intake, and I see these kind of like statements about like, and I've used that term before, the standard American diet, but in just seeing so many people on a daily basis and talking to them specifically about what they're eating, there's just so much variety. And so that's just like a little pet peeve of mine. Maybe that's a little bit of a reach of a pet peeve.
We aren't eating things that are alive. We aren't eating things that are fermented. We aren't eating things with good bacteria in them so often. And even the times that we think we are, like yogurt, everyone's like, oh, I'm going to eat some yogurt. Well, what's in your yogurt? It is probably packed full of what? Sugar.
Yes, because that is what helps with the fermentation, to have the fermentation process happen.
So totally not working for us, because the only thing particularly that we're maybe doing that we think is giving us these probiotics is also packed full of sugar. So it just negated the whole thing. Guys, this Candida grows and grows and grows, and there's so much of it. And that's when it becomes systemic. It's when the yeast, the fungal overgrowth becomes a part of your system, and it starts to really cause problems. You start to see leaky gut. And that's where proteins and things that are supposed to stay in your colon are now coming out into your bloodstream and causing you to have allergic reactions, causing causing you to have food sensitivities.
Okay, so let's talk about leaky gut really quick. Okay, so the term leaky gut, it can sound a little weird. It's referring to the intestinal permeability. So in our intestine, the intestinal wall, there is permeability there. And that's good. We want it because that allows water and nutrients to move through. Now, sometimes there can be an excessive amount of permeability or increased permeability, hyperpermeability. Now, it's not currently recognized as a medical diagnosis, the term leaky gut. Now, this is where sometimes there is a little bit confusion and why you'll hear people say that it doesn't exist, because it is true, as a medical diagnosis, leaky gut does not exist. Intestinal permeability is a real thing, and increased or hyperpermeability is also a real thing. And it is true that an increased permeability in the intestinal wall can trigger an inflammatory kind of response. Even from the Cleveland Clinic, they talk about that. We know the condition of having intestinal permeability or leaky gut is real, but we don't know that it's a disease in itself or that it causes other diseases. It's not currently a recognized medical diagnosis. And so you'll hear people, health professionals, say like it doesn't exist as a diagnosis though. And I think sometimes the public can hear that it doesn't exist, which is true, but think that that means that like it doesn't exist at all. And so you get this kind of side or group of people who hear, whenever they hear the term leaky gut, and kind of just like immediately shut off. And there's good reason for that, because a lot of nutrition related MLMs and non-MLMs too will use leaky gut as this kind of catch-all diagnosis, when in reality that's like taking something and running with it. And a lot of times in wellness culture, not just diet culture, but wellness culture, we see people kind of take something and just run with it and like ruin it, basically. Like an example, we saw this with collagen. Collagen is just another kind of protein source, but a lot of companies and influencers have taken, and distributors have taken the idea of collagen and like made it into this magical kind of supplement, when it's really not. And the fact that even though it doesn't have all of the essential amino acids that we need, it can still be fine to use, but wellness culture has kind of taken collagen and just kind of made it non-palatable to a lot of people who are trying to stay evidence-based, and used it as kind of this cure-all kind of thing. And so I see the same kind of thing happening with leaky gut, because it has become that kind of mainstream catch-all diagnosis. And unfortunately, that can cause a lot of people to go further, longer, without having a true diagnosis and knowing like more plan of action, like a better plan of care. Hyperpermeability of the intestinal wall is just too specific and too extreme to explain most people's symptoms. It's not like this kind of everyone has it. There are a lot of symptoms that overlap with a whole lot of other concerns or other issues going on. And the concern with leaky gut is that it's often paired alongside a program or a supplement regimen. So that is actually why I'm not a fan of that term. Like, it doesn't explain the important things. All right, back to the video.
There are places where you can get tested to see what your levels are. I did not ever actually have testing done for this. I could tell it was a problem. The professional I could work with knew it was a problem. I had my adrenals tested and we worked on that, but I just worked on the yeast. And I knew when it was gone. I could tell when it was gone. I felt like a different person. But it was very hand in hand with my adrenal fatigue. But there are tests out there, and I'll give you some links at the end of the call for some places where you can do that, or you can work with a functional doctor for.
Okay, so let's really talk about adrenal fatigue for a second. So adrenal fatigue is often used to describe the idea that you're having this kind of, the adrenal glands, that they're not producing enough hormones. And that can be an actual issue, right? So there's something called adrenal insufficiency, also known as Addison's disease. Now, that is an actual condition where the adrenal glands do not produce a sufficient amount of cortisol. That is actually a recognized medical condition, and that can be diagnosed with tests. According to the Endocrine Society, which is the largest organization of endocrinologists in the world, according to them, adrenal fatigue, that term itself, that's not a legitimate diagnosis. And the concern that I have when I do see something like adrenal fatigue, it's kind of like the term leaky gut, like there can be so many symptoms that overlap with other things. And so there's a concern with, if somebody is having those symptoms that is causing problems in their everyday life, and they get that kind of diagnosis from like a a functional doctor or an influencer, supplement distributor, if they're getting that diagnosis, what are they not getting diagnosed? What are they missing? There are some deficiencies, nutrient deficiencies, similar kind of symptoms to what is known as like adrenal fatigue. And so I'm not a fan of that word either. It's not surprising that this distributor is using that word either, though. You're going to do what that person is recommending, right? Like that distributor. And so typically that would be purchasing supplements. And because that doesn't actually exist, that diagnosis doesn't exist, those supplements might not be addressing what the actual root cause is. And so the concern is like, is that person going to miss something? And also, are they going to waste a lot of that money by continuing to be on these supplements that really aren't doing anything helpful for them in the long run?
If I didn't have sugar, so when I started cutting it out of my diet, I felt really weak and really shaky. So I would stop, I would not eat sugar and like for 24 hours. And I literally felt like I was in withdrawals. And that was the yeast screaming to be fed. How creepy is that?
It could also be that you're not getting enough carbohydrates. And if she was just getting meals of like protein and fats, yes, it's going to be very nutrient dense, but blood sugar wise, is it low at that point? You can feel that kind of weakness, not that it is the Candida screaming for you to feed it, but just weakness from going from having your body being used to a certain amount of carbohydrates to cutting out a significant portion of it.
I tried to do this on my own. I did a lot of reading and I tried to basically do it with diet. So I read about it and they were like, these foods feed the yeast and these foods starve it. And so I'm just going to cut out the ones that feed it, right? Oh my goodness. Don't highly recommend this because the die-off is incredibly difficult and you feel really, really crummy. And the problem is that in starving the Candida, yes, it can help. And yes, your symptoms can get better. But very often, as soon as you return to eating any of those foods again, just even on a normal basis, and it can even be like fruit sugars or not processed sugars. If you return to eating any of those things again, then it can kind of all come back. And that's what I kept seeing people as I was researching and in these groups and threads and places where people were talking about this. They were like, you just have to be really careful because you know, I ate an apple the other day and all my symptoms came back.
So if somebody eats an apple, going back to that concern that I had before, or that thought of maybe if they take out those foods and they start to feel better, it might be related to a FODMAP issue. That's a whole nother topic, that carbohydrate chain issue. For example, apples, those are high FODMAPs. And so if somebody just started consuming them again and they have those kind of symptoms, gas, bloating, constipation, or diarrhea, or change in their bowel movements, it can be not related to anything Candida-wise.
One of the things that I did while I was on my plan and that he recommended and that helped so much with the die-off process was he was like, don't even do this plan if you are not going to do this. And he told us that we had to take a detox bath I think he said 5-6 times a week. I felt so much better. I would start to feel a little bit bad. I would get in the detox bath and all that die-off stuff would go away. And I was literally just sweating junk out and it was giving my body a chance to recover. The other thing that he was like, don't do it if you're not going to do this, was take minerals because you're sweating out minerals and because mineral deficiency is a huge problem.
I mean, that's why if you are physically active and you are a heavy sweater, there are recommendations, like electrolytes, for example. I can understand why he said to increase the nutrient intake because of that, but I'm not a fan of detox baths.
Today, and I had access to mineral essence, that is what I would use. And so I would take as much mineral essence as you can get down a day. I would be getting it into your system. And we're going to talk a little bit about why. And it's one of the reasons that I am religious today about having mineral essence at all times. It is in my water. I crave it. I promise if you ever tried it and it tastes funny to you, try a little bit and then increase, because it's just your body's sensitivity, not being used to having it. It's not that it actually tastes that bad. And so the more that you have, I promise, will adjust to it. Just try using.
It's probably also related to your taste buds kind of changing and getting more used to something, just like anything else that you don't really like. The more you try something, you can kind of have your taste buds begin to like it.
Cinnamon has a lot of antifungal properties. So cinnamon oil has a lot of antifungal properties, which are really helpful. Thieves has cinnamon oil, and a lot of people have seen that consistent usage of that internally to be beneficial.
I would not recommend consuming thieves oil.
Another one is oregano. Oregano is considered one of the most effective antifungal oils and herbs.
So oil of oregano, that is often like one of the recommendations for like an overgrowth microbiome dysbiosis wise, but you can also have oregano like with tea, so you don't have to worry so much about like the oil itself, just because it is so strong. And furthermore, I would feel more safe recommending something like caprylic acid. So caprylic acid, that's a medium chain triglyceride. It's the one that is most abundant in coconut oil, for example. And so that also has similar kind of properties. And so consuming that is going to be safer wise than consuming thieves oil.
That could be really helpful, just something that you could start taking every day to start in that process of killing off the overgrowth of the Candida. That's an easy thing to start doing and to see how you feel and to see if you see results with that. And so those are two things that you can add to your regimen.
She doesn't mention like a specific time. So even if somebody was doing like oil of oregano, excessive amounts, that can cause damage down the line. And so just throwing that out there, taking thieves and more oils internally, that scares me. There's just so many recommendations that she is saying of like internal ingestion, a lot of oil. That's scary and unnecessary.
It's really, really important that you know the quality of the supplement that you're taking.
There are so many high quality supplements that, like, if somebody was concerned about microbiome dysbiosis, I really, really encourage you to seek out like a digestive health focus, a digestive health specialized registered dietitian. But if there is a need or a recommendation, a thought that a specific supplement can be beneficial, like I mentioned before, that caprylic acid, that might be something that I might recommend to someone. We can use something like Fullscript. So Fullscript is a dispensary, a supplement, high quality supplements that are like third party tested, and that you aren't just like purchasing it off like Amazon or something and getting like this supplement that has a lot of fillers or anything in it. And they're not MLM related or anything like that. And so I don't want anybody to think that like if they go to their doctor and they're just kind of told take a like basic probiotic, you're stuck between that and going to like Young Living or like a functional doctor. Like there are other options, and a digestive health focused dietitian is an option. And a lot of dietitians will do a sliding scale, just kind of depends on their plan of care availability. But I would say that is a great option if you can, and if you are having some concerns about digestive system related issues.
A lot of times Candida and parasites go hand in hand. So after you fight Candida, it's really good to hit your parasites. And we have a supplement called Para-Free that I have seen some more natural doctors talk about as the most.
I have seen so many stool samples, and stool samples are another kind of thing. Not seeing the stool samples, but seeing the results from the stool samples. Stool samples are one of those things also where it's kind of relatively new, getting more information, better kind of information regarding any kind of like response or treatment to having abnormal stool sample results. But I will say that for the amount of times that I have seen Candida in an overgrowth in people, I haven't seen parasites. I've worked with a lot of people in the digestive health area, and parasites just aren't something, and I've talked about it a lot in several of my videos. In the videos at the beginning of this year, also everything with BOO or Black Oxygen Organics, which we need to do an update on that. It's coming. But parasites aren't this kind of concern in the United States, right? Like it's very, very rare. That wraps it up for this video. Please be sure to leave a like, and remember, you can strive for health without subscribing to diet culture. I'll see you later. Bye.